The Nobel Peace Prize can wait. The same Donald Trump, whose administration just weeks ago paused munitions and air defense supplies for Ukraine, now turning on Vladimir Putin to a degree with ramped-up weapons sales for Kyiv and a 50-day deadline for a ceasefire. Why the about-face? How committed to Ukraine is Trump going forward? How committed to NATO? It'll be allies who pay for these weapons deliveries. Allies who know that the days are numbered for the United States providing the bulk of Europe's defense umbrella. By the way, it's the Bastille Day in Paris. And on France's national holiday, we'll review remarks by President Macron on Europe's strategic autonomy and see how Germany's defense minister is in Washington as Berlin takes stock of its own meager supplies of air defenses gets along. And then there's the war in Ukraine itself, with the Russians relentless in their bombardments and steadfastly refusing truce offers. Do these announcements out of Washington change the calculus at the Kremlin? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if Trump is reversing course. With us from Washington, France 24 correspondent Fraser Jackson. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
From London, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense and European and NATO Policy, Jim Townsend. Welcome to the show.
Great to be back.
It seems as though London is well represented. Maria Budgerin, Senior Research Associate at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center, also in the UK capital on this Bastille Day. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much, and happy Bastille Day to you, Francois.
Happy Bastille Day as well to Michael Benamou, Executive Director of the OPW think tank.
It is.
Good to see you.
Thanks for the invitation.
You can always listen, that's right, listen to the France 24 debate on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine streaming services. It's clear that something was afoot with that weekend announcement that NATO Secretary General was flying over to Washington. Mark Rutte on hand when Donald Trump announced that he was very disappointed with Vladimir Putin, but also with Joe Biden.
Doing very severe tariffs. We've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine, and would like to see it end. It wasn't my war, it was Biden's war. It's not my war, I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%.
Fraser Jackson, before we fact check who started the war in Ukraine, let me ask you about that. When Donald Trump talks about secondary sanctions, what does he mean?
Well, it's believed that he's going to be going along with a bill which is making its way through the US Congress at the moment, which basically would put a tariff on all third-party countries who buy Russian oil or gas. Now, that bill, it should be said, was effectively meant to pave the way for the White House to be able to use tariffs up to 500%. That was being pushed forward by Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal. But Donald Trump not going as far as that bill would allow him, instead saying that it's going to be 100%. He actually called the 500% figure meaningless after a certain point and said that 100% would do. Now, it should also be pointed out that there was some reporting from Axios just before we got the announcement that this was going to happen earlier on this morning, late last night, that the phone call that Donald Trump had with Vladimir Putin on the 3rd of July, Putin told Donald Trump that there was going to be that he wanted a 60-day window to be able to fulfill his aims that still remained inside of the inside of Ukraine, and that phone call was now 10 days ago, and Donald Trump has now given Vladimir Putin a 50-day window to come back to the negotiating table. So there are some critics online already who've said that this is effectively giving Vladimir Putin what he wanted, to give him the time to fulfill his goals before then having to come back to the negotiating table. The White House will say that it's holding firm, and that this is actually a strong message of support to Ukraine, but it's also, of course, going to be something that Donald Trump can sell to his base, that he's not giving weapons away to the Ukrainians, but rather these weapons are being bought by the Europeans.
Yeah, and you mentioned that article in Axios In it, they described the fact that at the NATO summit 2 weeks ago, Trump is described as having had a good meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. And then you allude to it there, that bad July 3rd phone call with Vladimir Putin. He wants to take all of it, meaning Ukraine, Trump told French President Emmanuel Macron shortly after a call, according to a source with direct knowledge. Marina Bujarin, what do you read in the announcements made from the Oval Office just now? And we heard Vladimir Putin. We heard Donald Trump at several points express his disappointment with Putin in those remarks. How far is he going, and is this any kind of a reversal?
It is a reversal of what we've seen from the White House thus far, which was the policy of putting pressure primarily on Ukraine and trying to play nice with the Kremlin in the hopes possibly of enticing Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table and do President Trump's bidding of ending this war quickly. Clearly, this has not worked. It is quite possible that Putin has overplayed his hand. I do not know what President Trump is thinking or what President Putin is thinking, but quite possibly President Putin does not have a ton of respect for the American leader. And in this arrogance, he tries to kind of continue prosecuting his war the way he had done thus far. This clearly has not played out the way he probably hoped in the White House. And President Trump is changing his rhetoric. Now, we'll have to wait and see whether this change in rhetoric will translate in actual policy changes. There's some optimistic signs, but so far, with the exception of the bill that's now in Congress, so far we haven't seen any game-changing policy moves from the White House. So even the announcement that there might be a Patriot system with two coming Ukrainian way, this is the continuation of the previous administration's policy of helping Ukraine with the military equipment and with the air defenses, even though the Trump version of it is going to involve Europeans paying for these defense systems. So this is an important moment, but it remains to be seen how much of a game changer it will be in terms of bringing about peace or in the way this war is prosecuted.
Paying for them as they should, Michael Benamou said the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who was trademarking his deft way of complimenting the U.S. president while at the same time trying to steer the conversation Ukraine's way.
Yeah, in terms of budgeting, according to my calculations and also at OPY, basically per year, Ukraine used to cost 50 billion to America and 50 billion to Europe. Maybe the panelist will say something else or nuance my figures, but basically Trump is now saying, the 50 billion that we used to pay, you will also have to pay, that share. And so Europe will have to pay per year 100 billion for Ukraine's military and also reconstruction. This is what it means, and I think this is the main information from what we heard today.
And is that why we're hearing the likes of Germany's chancellor, who's been talking up the idea of seizing Russian assets?
Yeah. Just in Patriots, it's 30 billion euros, which is the most expensive piece, in that military bill that Zelensky proposed to allies. And this is going to come probably from Germany. Trump referred to 17 Patriot systems sent to Ukraine. Actually, it's not 17. He was probably referring to the 11 Patriot systems that Germany possesses now, which means that Germany is going to purchase 11 or 15 new Patriot systems from the U.S.
Jim Townsend, the Ukrainian president quoted as saying that his country needs 25 Patriot batteries and currently has about 5 that are operational. What do you think of those numbers, and what are the needs of Ukraine at this point?
Well, everyone focuses on Patriot, and Patriot is the system that takes out those particularly the missiles that come in. But, you know, the drone problem is also big. And there's other systems that you use to take down the drones. So I think as we get into trying to supplement Ukraine air defense, Patriots is certainly part of it, but it's not the answer. And one of the things the Germans are doing too is they're providing these guns that are able to. They're like anti-aircraft artillery, if you know what I mean, from the old days. But those are effective in taking out drones. And so there's a lot of things that that all of Europe can do besides Patriot to try to help Ukraine deal not just with missiles coming down, but also these drones, and to help them prioritize too. And of course, that's going to be their decision. But they're not going to be able to handle all of the targets. They've got to figure out which targets get top priority. Where do the Patriots go? And then where do they put these other systems that can take out the drones?
And the remarks from Donald Trump, is it a change in rhetoric? Is there a shift?
It's a big change. It is a big change in rhetoric and in action as well. You know, he hasn't had any kind of record of providing his own assistance packages. That was always a Biden thing. Now what they're doing is, you know, having the European nations, the European Union, NATO involved in providing the assistance, and that's a brand new approach. So I think in terms of rhetoric, it's a change, but also in action. It's not going to be a Biden-style approach. It's going to be something involving the EU and involving NATO, involving the European nations bilaterally as well.
The Financial Times reporting that since that epic blow-up back in February between Trump and Zelensky at the Oval Office, Ukraine's president's been briefed and even coached, saying that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron advised Zelensky on how to shift his approach to dealing with the U.S. president by offering emphatic praise and always thanking Washington for his support. Fraser Jackson, did you sense a change in Donald Trump's words?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the Vladimir Zelensky thing is certainly important and has definitely happened. If you remember seeing him at the NATO summit, he was looking much more like what a world leader from elsewhere in the world looks like. His army fatigues were gone. That was something that Donald Trump picked him up upon numerous times at the White House, including J.D. Vance. He also picked him up on it as well, his dress sense and his fashion choices. So that has definitely showed that Vladimir Zelensky, in a more symbolic way, has shifted his style to deal with Donald Trump. Whether Donald Trump fully has changed his ideas here, I think we need to kind of be a bit more careful about. Yes, this is a significant change in terms of rhetoric, but as somebody who covers the White House every day, I see his rhetoric change from moment to moment. And there was a flash in there which really caught my attention during that 45 or so minute meeting with Rutte today in the Oval Office. But Donald Trump just couldn't help himself and went back to those old talking points that he's used about Ukraine and about Ukraine also not just being the kind of country that has had this happen to them, but it is also potentially, you know, fighting and delaying a peace process. He said once again that he would have to see what Ukraine does once it gets this weapons system delivered to it, because he said they may feel emboldened to continue. Well, Mark Rutte at that point then stepped in and says, no, I think Ukraine wants peace. And it was after that interjection that Trump kind of backed down a bit, saying, I feel confident that they'll do what has to be done. But he's still using that talking point that Ukraine here is not some kind of, you know, passive victim, but actually has some kind of role in all of this. And of course, that has been flat out denied by Ukraine, by the Europeans as well, who said that Ukraine is the partner who is looking for peace here and is looking to come to the table, and it's Russia that is continuing this action. So despite the fact that Vladimir Putin now is on notice from Donald Trump, the sentiment that Donald Trump holds for Vladimir Putin runs deep, clearly.
Mariana Bujarin, how deep? I mean, when you heard Trump again go back to that usual talking point of blaming Joe Biden who became president in 2021, whereas Russia first started sending weapons to the Donbass in 2014, you know, when Donald Trump says this, is this what he believes in his heart of hearts, or is he thinking about domestic politics and particularly his right flank?
Francois, there's no way of knowing what President Trump believes in his heart of hearts. Clearly, it has been his brand to blame President Biden for many things, including this war, but he's also blamed Ukraine at one point for this war. So, you know, some people say we need to take what President Biden says seriously, but not literally. He wanted to handle this war very differently from President Biden. I think so far he's realized that it's difficult. It's hard to stop a war and negotiate peace if one of the parties doesn't want to come to the table at all. And in this, I have to say, President Zelensky, under very difficult circumstances, has played a weak hand rather well. Even the incident that we mentioned at the White House turned out to be sort of a win for each one of the leader, right? The President Trump could, you know, posture in front of his constituency as being kind of this tough guy who puts it out to other leaders and stands up for American interest. And President Zelensky got a lot of empathy from people who would have hated to find themselves in the same position in the White House, and kind of the pettiness of that exchange. And so after this, I think Ukrainian leadership, as you mentioned, tried really hard, was coached, and in the way tried to weather this rather unpredictable situation in a way as to not to further alienate the White House, not to further alienate President Trump. And, you know, in that task, it seems that President Putin has been helpful in being recalcitrant and not wanting to go along with President Trump's ideas about the ceasefire or kind of peace settlement. So again, having said that, it's very difficult to know how deep this runs, how sustainable it will be, if something else won't come up that will either distract President Trump's attention from Ukraine, or there will be another shift in the rhetoric. So possibly room for cautious optimism, but at this point, I remain a skeptic here.
Yeah, hawkish U.S. senators from both sides of the aisle pressing hard for retribution against Russia and for and against all those who finance Russia's war effort.
The big offender here is China, India, and Brazil. India buys oil from Russia cheap and resells it. That's despicable. I've talked to President Trump. He said last week it's time to move.
That's Republican Senator Lindsey Graham speaking on one of the Sunday morning talk shows in the United States. Michael Benamou, yeah, these secondary sanctions, we presume that Trump, although he didn't make it explicit, is referring to those who purchase oil. Yeah. He's got 50 days to make up his mind, though.
Yeah, he left out also Turkey in that list. So the main countries which are importing and sometimes reselling Russian oil are China, India, and Turkey, also Brazil, but also us, the EU. You know, it's basically, I think 6% or 7% of Russia's oil exports are in Europe, and so I wonder how can this be amply implemented? You know, will America sanction us Europeans if we continue to import Russian oil? So and
50 days takes us what, to early September? A lot's going to happen.
Yeah, early September, and I think really the main information from today was that Europe will cover for the American bill in Ukraine. You know, and I think the sanctions are not really something that can be achieved in practice. India is an ally of America, Brazil as well. Turkey is a major ally of the US. I don't see the Americans sanctioning countries that they rely upon for sales and for also their diplomacy across the world.
And meanwhile, over in Kyiv, Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy welcome, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who was greeted amid talk of joint arms production, drone production. There he is with Andriy Yermak, the assistant to President Zelensky, later welcomed by the president himself. It's always, Jim Townsend, it seems like a bit of a double act when we see Keith Kellogg in images. We know that Ukraine is in favor, and when we see his negotiator, Steve Witkoff, we know that he's paying more attention to what's going on in Moscow. Is that how it works? Jim Townsend?
I'm afraid that you froze up. I couldn't hear the question.
It's just simply the fact that Keith Kellogg making the trip to Kyiv at this point, what does that tell you?
Well, you know, Kellogg, he's the whisperer for Trump in terms of talking to Zelensky, talking to Ukraine. He's got a soft spot in his heart for Ukraine and what's happening there. And so when Keith Kellogg shows up, you know that he's passing messages back and forth. He's giving advice to Ukraine. And it does show interest, I think, in the White House. When there's something that needs to be told to Zelensky, Kellogg is the man to tell it. And I think he tells it in a way that is not going to be insulting the way it might have been like during the Oval Office days of a few months ago. So Kellogg being involved to me means that there's work going on behind the scenes, and Witkoff is the guy who they're going to have take it across the goal line.
All right, that brings us to the topic of Bastille Day. On the eve of the annual military parade in Paris this Monday, Emmanuel Macron had told his government to find the money to beef up defense. The French in the same boat as the Germans. This despite a record budget deficit in this country. For all its talk of strategic autonomy, for all the might projected on the Champs-Élysées earlier, France's weak points have been laid bare by Moscow's westward push in Ukraine. Nicholas Rothworth explains.
The French armed forces have tanks, guns, combat aircraft, submarines, an aircraft carrier and a nuclear deterrence. It also has a wealth of know-how acquired during numerous overseas operations. But is France equipped to deal with the more intense conflict seen today? People in Kyiv in Ukraine are being targeted by drones. Up to 600 kamikaze drones a day have been sent in recent weeks by the Russians into the heart of Ukrainian cities. And drones also threaten soldiers in front-line trenches. Could France cope in a war like this? No, says a former French Air Force general.
The discovery of the Ukrainian theatre is all the little drones for the infantry used on the battlefield or against tanks. It's mainly the land army that needs to equip itself with this type of equipment to detect, intercept, fight and destroy the opponent's positions.
A new threat? Missile attacks launched from Yemen by the Iranian-backed Houthi militia. A Liberian ship was hit and sank in the Red Sea a few days ago. The French army is itself threatened by the Houthis and responds from a frigate with Aster missiles. But does France have enough of them? There are only several hundred in stock. Each missile costs €1.5 million. Another threat is wars in which missiles rain down, such as in this Iranian attack on Israel. France has just a limited number of air defense weapons systems. The French Armed Forces Minister says that France is in a capability gap because past choices mean the government will have to wait until 2026 for the next generation of ground air defense systems. There are also hybrid warfare threats, with Russia, for example, accused of cutting underwater communication cables that provide internet links, or of election interference, or spreading fake news. France also wants to make up for lost time in tackling such threats and hire expert personnel to do so.
Michael Benamou, you heard earlier Jim Townsend saying we shouldn't be just talking about Patriot air defense missiles. Here you see the long list in that report of areas where what's happening on the battlefield in Ukraine is laying bare where there are shortfalls.
Jim Townsend is right, but Patriots are half the bill basically. That's why we always talk about it. But then you have the other half, which is drones, artillery, logistics also, and so that is also extremely important. The risk in this situation is that for Europeans is with the money that is now being given to the military is not to develop a European defense, a European industrial base, but to actually purchase off-the-shelf American products in the US and then deliver them to Ukraine. This is the risk that we have in the coming years in Europe, which is not to use this as an occasion to actually have a real European strategy backed by factories, but just buy stuff from the US and then give it to Ukraine. That is not, I think, a sustainable strategy for the coming decade in Europe. And this is unfortunately what we have with Trump, who is playing with European fears and creating a panic out of which he's extracting billions of military sales.
Fraser Jackson, it's interesting because we're talking after last week's summit or state visit of Emmanuel Macron to Britain, and this Thursday you're going to have Keir Starmer welcoming his German counterpart. And yeah, a lot of the discussion there, will it be about buying stuff off the shelf, as Michael is saying?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we're in a real kind of unique moment in European unity, certainly that I've seen in the last 10 or so years, especially post-Brexit. This is really something which has brought together the Europeans, given the fact that they're having to now deal with a war on the European continent when their biggest partner, America, has effectively got one foot out of the game. And when I have conversations with European diplomats here in Washington, they make it very clear the kind of difficulty they have, to discuss these kind of things with the Americans, especially in comparison to how it was under the previous administration. So now we see a slew of European diplomats trying to discuss among each other and then kind of come to America with a plan that they can put forward as the kind of united European front, as it were, which is clearly now working in this sense for Donald Trump. It's something he can score as a political victory for his base, but the Europeans also see as a victory in keeping those arms going to Ukraine. But as we heard, this is unlikely to be a sustainable model for the Europeans to hold over the next 4 or so years. This could end up costing them a lot more money than it has done over the course of the last 3 or so years. Now, the Americans rather will say that it's about time that the Europeans paid more money, given that this is a war that has happened on their continent. Donald Trump often says that the Americans have outspent the Europeans by 3 times. Of course, his figures are skewed and incorrect. But for the base in America, they will say that it's about time the Europeans paid more and the Americans got more back from their funding of the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, France, again, it's one of those countries whose coffers are empty. The president, in that Bastille Eve speech, was still talking up the need to make that commitment.
To be free in this world, you have to be feared. To be feared, you have to be powerful.
Mariana Bujarin, people listen to the French president talking there. Are they smiling? Are they taking it seriously? What's your reaction to that clip?
Well, I'm not sure I quite would agree with President Macron that to be respected is to be feared. That's a phrase that's more characteristic of someone like President Putin than a leader of a democratic European nation. But I can see where he's coming from, right? Europe has sort of put its own defense and its own defense capability on the back burner for a long time. And now we see in fits and starts efforts to rejuvenate Europe's own strategic, whether autonomy or just defense capacity. And as you mentioned, it's not easy because it costs money. And then even that depends on the health of your economy and being able to maintain societal cohesion as you're spending more on defense rather than on social programs. And money has to come from somewhere. And once the money has been allocated, the question is, well, what is it that you produce with it? Whether you buy U.S. systems or you actually invest in your own defense capacity. And if you do invest in your own defense capacity, what is it that you produce? More tanks? I mean, we're all hoping that the European leaders, including the French, are taking notes from the Ukrainian theater, where tanks were important initially, and now they're extremely vulnerable to very cheap, not so high-tech systems such as FPV drones. A $500 FPV drone can take out, $3 million tank. And these very exacerbated asymmetries of capabilities and of costs on the battlefield certainly would have to inform European defense choices. It is encouraging, however, to see this kind of strong language coming out of France and hopefully of Germany and the UK, because Europe needs leadership. So hopefully this is a sign of maybe this condominium of leaders, the France, Germany, and UK, emerging to take over the space that is being left vacant by the retreating United States, retreating from the European security theater. So let's hope this works.
Jim Townsend, let me put it to you. You're in London right now. Again, when there's the UK Prime Minister and the German Chancellor who signed a defense pact together on Thursday, how much weight does it carry if they're at the same time buying all those off-the-shelf weapons, as Michael was saying, from the United States?
Well, I look on it as a long-term and short-term question, in the sense that in the short term, there's a real need today, right now. We're even behind the curve in a lot of ways of getting assistance to Ukraine, number one. Number two, building up European military capability here in Europe. So in the short term, there really isn't much of an alternative but to buy off the shelf in the United States in order to fill all these gaps. But in the long term, it's going to have to be shifted so that investment over time in European defense industry, partnering with the U.S. This doesn't have to be a fortress Europe, but this is something where it's going to have to shift towards European money being used to buy European systems, manufactured in Europe, European jobs, and all that type of thing. Right now, the European industry can't do this at scale. They're too small. They're ramping up right now. It's going to take time. It's going to take money. There's got to be direction in terms of what kinds of things should come out of Europe. NATO will be part of this as well. And then, of course, providing to Ukraine is going to dictate a lot of the march, too. But in the long term, that's going to have to happen, is that the momentum will shift to Europe and away from buying off the shelf in the U.S.
And Germany's role in all of this, is it going to wind up being the lead in this, or will it still be the French?
Well, Germany, in terms of manufacturing at scale, a broad range of military items like armor and this type of thing, Germany is definitely in the lead, but and will be the leader. But I want to say that France is going to be there too. France produces systems as well, very sophisticated systems, missiles, aircraft. So France will be right up there, but Germany is usually the engine when it comes to European defense and European industry. But I am certain that France, as well as the UK, will be right behind Germany. And they'll, as was said by my colleague from Harvard, it's going to be a triumvirate here of three countries that will be leading Europe.
Meanwhile, while the Americans and Europeans try to pile on the pressure, over at the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin this Monday hosting a meeting to talk about demography. His defense minister, meanwhile, though, in images purportedly of the day put out by the defense ministry, Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, in the Pokrovsk region near the front line in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. For civilians in Ukraine, the daily diet of aerial assaults continues, with 3 killed overnight in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions near the front. Again, I come back to this 50 days here, Michael Benamou, because what can happen in Ukraine over the next 50 days?
I don't think. I mean, what you will see is drone strikes and ballistic missiles strikes, which will impede Ukrainians from sleeping, which is quite tough. I mean, in Ukraine, every night you're woken up by the sirens, and so you have this choice to make, this dilemma: do I stay in my bed or do I go in the subway? And this is going to intensify. On the battlefield, you won't see much. You know, Russia is advancing, but very, very slowly. 3 years ago, Russia had an additional 10.5% of Ukraine land. That was 3 years ago, an additional 10.5. 3 years after now, they own 11.5%. So in 3 years of combat in the east of Ukraine, they only won 1% of Ukraine's territory. That's all. 1 million soldiers killed or wounded for 1% of Ukraine's land. This is Russia's very sad and tragic and inefficient military results. So I think you're going to see more of that, and we'll have to see Putin's reaction to Trump's, remark today.
You know, I asked you earlier, Mariana Bucharin, what's in Donald Trump's head, and you deftly avoided that one. What about what's in Vladimir Putin's head? Let me be specific. All he would have to do, right, is have a truce for a short period. Wouldn't that be enough to win over Donald Trump? Why can't he do that? Wouldn't that be in his interest?
Well, he is advancing on the battlefield at a great cost, as has been remarked. He can launch these massive drone and missile attacks at Ukraine and terrorize Ukraine even more. And what is the point for him to stop? What is the enticement? Just to please Donald Trump? For the sake of what? Yeah. I'm not sure President Putin believes he is winning, but I think he believes that he's got the upper hand in this war.
Okay, let me argue the point here. For the sake of what? For the sake of Trump stops all military supplies to Ukraine. He could win a lot more, couldn't he?
Possibly. There, again, has been remarked right now, up until this point, much of the military aid that has been forthcoming was part of the package that has been approved under the Biden administration. So it's not like President Trump up to this point has been supplying all these arms to Ukraine. And it is only now that he's agreed to supply some air defense and some other military equipment to Ukraine. So possibly having that as a leverage might sway Mr. Putin's mind. But I don't think pleasing President Trump is a particular priority for Putin. He's repeatedly staked out his goals, which is all of Ukraine, a collapse of Ukraine, or some kind of change of leadership right in Ukraine, and having Ukraine in his sphere of influence. And in that, he has failed. So what would dissuade President Putin from pursuing these goals remains to be seen. Right now, even the shift of rhetoric coming out of the White House, I do not believe it is sufficient to change President Putin's mind. He's 3.5 years into it at a great cost, sunk cost argument, if not anything else. He needs to show something for this great cost and great sacrifice. I see this being a long war, and I think we have to prepare for it, whatever President Trump wants or says.
Michael Benham.
Yeah, very quick. I just wanted to say that I agree with Maria. I believe that what happened today is not going to change the battlefield. The only thing that may change the battlefield and bring back deterrence is Europeans sending troops to Ukraine, honestly. At some point, we will have to ask ourselves that question. We're not ready to do that for reasons that Jim Townsend mentioned. We cannot produce weapons at scale. But when we can, the question will be, do we go there? And with how many troops, with what mandate? This is the only thing that can actually...
You realize what you're saying is what scares our viewers the most here in Europe.
This is the only thing that can actually convince Putin to stop his aggression of Ukraine. Let's be honest here. It's not going to be sanctions or tough talk at the White House. It's going to be troops, boots on the ground, and probably it's going to be European allies doing so. The question is when, and will Ukraine still be there when we can do that?
Jim Townsend, let me ask you. There is this perhaps subtle shift on the part of Donald Trump this Monday. At the end of the day, isolationists or those who are more skeptical of foreign campaigns like his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, they come and go. The Pentagon as an institution remains. Is it that no matter what happens, at the end of the day, the United States projects its military power abroad?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I would say, you're right. The Pentagon does exist. At the end of the day, Pete Hegseth comes and goes, and all the various people that we see in the headlines today. The Pentagon stays. But one thing is that Pentagon isn't going to move, and that Pentagon isn't going to do things unless the political leadership is telling it to do it. That's one thing I've worked there for so many years. That the Pentagon is hardly a deep state. People might think it is, but it is not. And it has a view. It has a view about things, but it stays quiet. And so it is going to be responsive to whoever comes back into that White House. We think about post-Trump all the time. Is it J.D. Vance? What will he bring? What will the Pentagon be responding to coming from him? Do the Democrats have someone that are going to come in and give some guidance that is going to be whipsawing to the Pentagon because it'll be so different from Trump? We just don't know. But you're right. At the end of the day, the Pentagon will remain, but it's going to be there responsive to whoever's going to be in that White House.
Do you agree with that, Mariana Bujarin, that the Pentagon stays quiet? Or is there subtle pressure, particularly when you look at the size of its budget?
To be honest, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the workings of the Pentagon that closely. But having said that, there's a good reason why there's civilian oversight over the military, and that has been ingrained in American political culture very deeply. So I have to agree with Jim that it's limited what the Pentagon can do, given that they take orders from the higher ups.
Fraser Jackson, public opinion right now. We heard Donald Trump repeatedly say, "I'm not sending troops. I'm only talking tough on Putin because he's not cooperating. But I'm not starting a war. I'm trying to end one here." Public opinion. How does it feel about Ukraine? Not just his base, but just more generally, public opinion in the United States.
I think, like anything in the U.S., it's so polarized. A lot of Democrats still believe that Ukraine needs to be defended and that the U.S. should be doing more to give money to Ukraine and to give weapons to Ukraine. And the Republicans on the other side, a lot of them believe that they shouldn't be doing that. Now, of course, there are some Republicans, like Lindsey Graham, for example, who believe that the U.S. should be doing more to help Ukraine. But Donald Trump, at the end of the day, ran on an America First policy, and it is that policy and the belief that he will be putting the American people and their needs over anything else. That is the reason Donald Trump got re-elected to the White House. And we've already seen that Donald Trump is selling this to his base. As I've said, he is trying to spin this as a win that he is now getting the Europeans to give billions of dollars worth of money to the United States defense industrial complex, and that he's not just giving away these arms, and he's tried to very much make that distinction between him and the previous administration. But, you know, even that message, despite some of the people on the right wing and the MAGA sphere who are you know, now fully running with that, I've seen that briefly on Twitter. A lot of them are saying this is how it's done, this is how it should have always been done. But some of them are still disagreeing with him. And at the moment, with the whole Jeffrey Epstein debacle, which is happening here in the United States, the MAGA base is in a very vulnerable position right now. And some of Donald Trump's most ardent supporters are now expressing criticisms of him. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for one, who even before this announcement was made official, had said that we need to start focusing on housing and insurance and the cost of living in America. She said even if we're selling weapons to Ukraine, it's more important that we look after our own first.
All right, and we'll see which way Donald Trump tilts in the end. 50 days, he says. We'll have to leave it there for now. He does say, though, he made remarks after the sit down with the NATO Secretary General that those weapons are going to be delivered, quote, immediately to sites of war. I want to thank you, Fraser Jackson, for joining us from Washington, Mariana Bujarin and Jim Townsend in London. Michael Benamou, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.